Great pleasure to see you, Colin, again, and to have you here at the Blockchain Summit Global 2021.
Amazing. Yeah, appreciate you having me, and always excited. I've been looking forward to it all week. And from what I hear from Bill, who's been speaking last night and kind of attending some of the different conversations, he said it's been a great show so far. So excited to walk through the workshop today.
Amazing to have you here. You know, the subject here is very important because, as you very well know, it would be a quite imperative requirement for the future to any financial institution or financial obliged subject to have someone that can be able to effectively trace transactions of the blockchain. And in that subject matter, as an expert, you will be able to provide today some key inside information about how a forensic investigation works. A little bit of your background, so sorry because I skipped the introduction. For all the attendees, Colin Angus is a member of the Blockchain Intelligence Group, and he's going to provide to us a demonstration of a crypto and blockchain forensics tool, which is a proprietary solution called QLUE and BitRank verified. Colin is an expert in the tracing and following of money fluxes and value fluxes, so to say, in the blockchain, which is without any doubt a crucial matter for the correct implementation of any compliance and due diligence procedures, as well as criminal investigations in the future. So once again, great to have you here, Colin. And if you're ready, they're all yours.
Perfect. So appreciate it, Pablo. Yeah, and like you said, I've been, that's just a little bit of background on myself before I jump in. Yeah, I've been in crypto for about the last 5 years. So I was kind of, I think one of the many who got interested back in kind of 2016, 2017, when the price of Bitcoin started to go through the roof. Everyone started paying attention. What is this crypto thing? Looking into it a little bit further. So that's kind of what sparked the interest for me. And the first few years was working with crypto exchanges, crypto ATM companies. Actually initially worked for a company here in Vancouver, which is actually Blockchain Intelligence Group's now sister company, which is called Netcoins. And I worked for them for a few years originally on the business development team until they were actually acquired by Blockchain Intelligence Group. And now I've kind of moved over into the compliance and AML worlds. And it's been an exciting ride, as I'm sure you can attest to. Crypto keeps you on your toes. It's exciting. It's always changing. And so it's been, yeah, I don't think I would trade it for any other industry, just because it's, it's really fun to
exactly. Same with this side. It's amazing to surf this wave. Once you taste it, you can never go back. Just like that.
It's true. It's true. It keeps things exciting, and every day there's new innovations, new changes, and so I've been loving the last few years. And so now that I've moved over to Blockchain Intelligence Group, just to give everybody a bit of background on Blockchain Intelligence Group itself. So we've actually been around for about 6 years. We're founded in 2015. We're a Canadian company, so myself and a majority of our team are based here in Vancouver, Canada. We also have offices around the world, down in the US, over in Europe, and elsewhere around the world, just to serve our different customers. And we were originally founded kind of as the initial thought for the business was to kind of become a search engine for the blockchain. And so from there, we very quickly got pulled into quite a few different arenas to kind of formulate what that tool would actually look like. And one of the first ones was actually working with the Hong Kong police on one of the first cryptocurrency investigations. And we actually ended up getting that contract because we were one of the only companies out there at the time. And we were the only company that was willing to essentially go to court to back the data that was used in that investigation. And so from there, we've continued to develop our tools over the last 5 years or so, to the point now where we have kind of two main aspects of the business, which we'll get into a little bit today. One is called QLUE, and that is essentially designed for forensic investigations, primarily used by law enforcement groups, federal agencies around the world, as well as compliance teams within financial institutions, crypto exchanges, to kind of do, their enhanced due diligence on some of the customers that they deal with. And then from there, we've kind of spun out a secondary product as well called BitRank. And BitRank is specifically designed for the financial world. And it's more so driven through API functionality. So when crypto exchanges are dealing with thousands or tens of thousands of transactions every day, they can confidently scan those addresses and transactions to make sure that they're not accepting any illicit transactions or any illicit funds.
Okay, so you're prepared through that tool to handle a huge, a great deal of transactional volume, so to say.
Exactly. Yeah, we can scale our systems as big as needed. So, in the future, if all goes well, according to plan, and more and more the financial industry starts getting involved in crypto, yeah, our systems can scale to essentially unlimited capacity, and we can run through millions and millions of transactions, essentially to try to spot and pick out those illicit addresses, so that banks can kind of follow their internal AML and compliance procedures.
That's great. That's great. And through API, the financial institutions can just plug into your solution and handle a big volume of data, which is one of the, no doubt, without any doubt, one of the challenges that is presenting today. Because so to say, if you would be in the need of tracing one particular transaction, QLUE would be the QLUE tool would be the way to go. But if you need to handle a higher volume of data, BitRank Verified could do it for you through API.
Exactly. And a lot of times they're actually used in tandem as well. So if you get, a transaction that comes in that throws out some alerts or some red flags, you would then, as an internal compliance team, be able to grab that address, throw it into QLUE, and start to do a bit more digging into it and a bit of an investigation, and see where, start to see where those funds have originated from, where they might be going, and start to kind of, paint the full picture for that address.
That's amazing. Also, it would be correct to say that you provide a comprehensive solution to going from the big, scope to the particular one, and all with the necessary support any of those institutions might need. You provide
exactly. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, from those two tools, it very quickly pushed us into the training and education side of things. As we were, in the early days going out there and starting to kind of spread the word, like, hey, we have these tools where you can go, solve these crypto investigations. We weren't getting questions back about how the tools work or what investigations folks were working. We were more getting questions about what is Bitcoin? How does Bitcoin work? How do transactions on the blockchain work? How do criminals actually use this for illicit purposes? So the questions were very, in the early days, they were very basic, and folks were still just trying to kind of learn about crypto and blockchain as a whole. And so that's when we started getting more into the training and education side. And right now we do have our certified cryptocurrency investigator training course. It's an online course, fully self-paced, so folks can work through it as slow or quickly as they like. And that was designed again by our in-house team of law enforcement and compliance folks, specifically geared to educate those folks in law enforcement and compliance. And so basically it's a course that will bring you up to speed on everything from the basics of Bitcoin, how a transaction works, what an input and an output is, all the way down the line to the different services that are available out there, like darknet markets, different decentralized exchanges, centralized exchanges, and then how to actually go about investigating a cryptocurrency crime or some illicit transactions on the blockchain. So it's kind of a full scope course at this point.
That's amazing. So if, for instance, if any compliance officer or any investigator or prosecutor was presented with the money flux in fiat, and at the end of that money flux has a person that bought or sold a cryptocurrency, mainly Bitcoin, because Bitcoin still rules has this gravitational effect in the ecosystem. His comprehension of the situation won't stop where Bitcoin presents. He or she will be able to go further on and, for instance, evaluate correctly if the person who bought or sold a Bitcoin was indeed involved in a maneuver or perhaps the maneuver is against that person. Some aspects that, yeah, that messes with the heads of regulators usually, and because of my personal experience, I can tell you that it's very difficult to demonstrate this. There's quite a very tangible lack of education and comprehension, and so your provision of services being so comprehensive, not only a vision that not only it prevents the misuses of cryptocurrencies, but it also, helps the adoption, the safe and sane adoption of this technology, which is very, very important, but by demystifying many of the things that we usually hear. I'm sure that you do as well as me as a specialist in this area.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, we've found, in the past, a lot of folks are really, really well versed in the, AML investigation side in the fiat world, or the, regular financial world. And it's really just that last piece of understanding cryptocurrency. And once they're able to better understand crypto and how it all works, they can then apply that past experience, in their previous role as a compliance officer or law enforcement investigator. They can then now bring that into the crypto world and start to investigate crypto crimes. And that's essentially, our focus is not so much uncovering, who owns the, X wallet over here, or who owns, this wallet over here. It's more so for us to weed out kind of the bad actors, so that, like you said, the industry can kind of move forward, and financial institutions and different parties can get involved and not have to worry about so much about the risks, but really focus on the opportunity that's available, from the innovation that's come through cryptocurrency.
Great work. That's great work, Colin, and it's crucial, very useful for the correct development of the ecosystem. And I sense that a couple of years from now, everyone will have to will start to have a more in-depth comprehension of what the blockchain is about, because all the data is there, and we can further help to develop this amazing technology that we all like very much. So in that sense, perhaps would be good now to start the demonstration of the tools with some real life cases that I'm sure that you will explain with complete clarity, so that attendees can start to understand how now they have the tools that can give it an ease of mind regarding the road they have to walk to in order to be able to perform due diligence and compliance upon cryptocurrency transactions.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to jump into it. I guess one thing I just wanted to kind of point out prior to jumping in was there's a lot of kind of similarities and differences between, similarities and tons of differences, obviously, between kind of the traditional financial world and cryptocurrency. But I think a lot of times, especially in law enforcement and kind of the regulation space, compliance, a lot of times what people seem to look over is blockchain is very transparent. There's different levels of transparency. But from my perspective, working in the space for quite a while, speaking with folks in the traditional financial world, I think the main difference is with the traditional financial world, a lot of the information is very siloed. It's available to law enforcement officers if they're able to subpoena financial institutions to gather records, things like that. But with Bitcoin and blockchain and other cryptocurrencies, everything is out there on the blockchain. It's all essentially public. It can be anonymous. A lot of if you look at a public block explorer, you're not going to see anybody's name on the block explorers. But with companies like ours out there collecting data over years and years and years, the blockchain can start to become a very clear picture for where transactions have come from, where they're going, and so it provides a different level of transparency in my eyes in comparison to the traditional financial world.
Absolutely agree, and I might add to that not also it provides a higher level of transparency, but also to security. It implicates a higher security level for data protection, because if there was to be a leak on personally identifiable information regarding a transaction, it would be a lot more at risk than in a traditional, let's say, wire transfer transaction, because on behalf of one transaction and identifying one real person with one address, you basically could reveal his or her entire financial history and his economic situation as well. So these tools, this kind of tools, I think that properly used will be able to provide a way to implement certain, pseudo regulations like the travel rule, which is one of the main, let's say, challenges we all have today. Because one thing that many regulators fail to understand is that if you reveal one transaction and a bad actor can associate that transaction with a real person, it is a lot that is at risk. Not only that particular transaction, but the whole traceability of that person's activities in the blockchain.
Very true. Very true. Yeah. Once you're able to kind of identify that initial address, you can really start to paint quite a clear picture from there.
Hey, amazing. Well, that's great, Colin. If you're ready, if you want, whenever you're ready, we can start to enter the thrilling world of the blockchain that I'm sure all that this will enjoy. Diving in the blockchain is kind of an addictive thing. Once you start doing it, you can't stop.
It is.
Colin will take you through a very thrilling ride, delving into the blockchain with you. So all yours, Colin.
Excellent. Absolutely. Let me share my screen here. And yeah, to your points, are you able to see my screen here? Just on blockchain.com. Perfect. Yeah, to your point, it is quite addicting. If anyone out there has access to these tools, I'm sure they can attest to it as well. Once you get access to tools like this that can kind of paint quite a clear picture of the blockchain, it's quite fun to explore and see what's going on in some of these different transactions. And so I've actually, just prior to jumping into our tool, I've got to open blockchain.com here. And I just wanted to kind of demonstrate the difference and different levels of transparency that are available on the blockchain. So I've opened blockchain.com here. It's a pretty standard or a pretty well-known Bitcoin block explorer. So like I said previously, essentially all cryptocurrencies out there will rely on their blockchain, and they'll all have essentially a block explorer where you can go dive in and kind of look into each of the individual transactions. You can see all the different addresses that are involved in a transaction. And so I've pulled up one transaction here. It's actually quite a sizable transaction. There's 22,249 Bitcoin being sent in this transaction. And so from the public block explorer, what you'll see is essentially these different strings and letters, and these are identifying the different parties that are involved in the transaction. So the transaction itself is represented by this cryptographic hash. And then the three addresses that are involved are this input address over here that is essentially sending the 22,249 Bitcoin. And then we have the two receiving addresses over here, one receiving 70 Bitcoin and the other receiving about 22,178 Bitcoin, or the remaining change of that transaction. And so on a public block explorer, it gives you quite a bit of information. Again, this is more information than you'd be able to look into for a traditional financial transaction. I don't know about anyone else, but I don't personally have any access to anyone else's bank records, so I'm not able to see Pablo's transactions or anybody else's. But anything done on the blockchain here is fully transparent. You're just not able to necessarily connect these addresses to somebody's specific name. And that's where a company like Blockchain Intelligence comes in. And essentially what we do is we go out and collect data, both open source as well as from different partners and customers and things that we have. And we collect that data, verify that data, and then add it into our system. So that when you take a transaction like this, which is seemingly anonymous, you can actually display that same transaction in our tool here. And it's very, very simplified. So the address that you see on the left here actually belongs to QLUE, which is an exchange over in Asia. And they actually sent that 70.2 Bitcoin to another exchange called Bitfinex. And so when you look at it on a public block explorer, it's fairly anonymous. You don't know who's interacting with who. But with years of kind of collecting data and overlaying that on top of the blockchain, it makes it very, very clear that QLUE is sending 70 Bitcoin to Bitfinex. So it's just a very simplified way of looking at it. And we have internally, we have our investigation team always likes to say, the blockchain never forgets. So from an investigative perspective, even if you don't necessarily have the intel today, the blockchain is always going to be there. You're always going to be able to revisit it. And so as time goes on, you're going to continue to collect data. You're going to continue to collaborate with other parties and pull different data into the system. And eventually, down the line somewhere, you'll likely pull in data that you'll be able to utilize in some of your past cases. And you can always go back, look at those previous transactions, apply that new data that you've collected, and get a much clearer and clearer picture of what's going on the blockchain. So I always like to kind of start with that. It gives a very clear picture of what's going on. It kind of demonstrates the difference between, public block explorer and then what a tool like ours can do once you're implementing, thousands and thousands of different data points in there.
Yes, and also if you need to keep up to speed with the criminal, because if you start, tracing the thing through a normal open source, let's so to say, forensic tool, you can, spend days just following one or two things.
Exactly.
So,
that's a great point. It's a great point. And yeah, that's a big part of what we do is try to help law enforcement speed up their process. We've dealt with folks who up until, even a few months ago or even up to date, law enforcement agencies and compliance teams are utilizing, for the most part, public block explorers or information that's publicly available. And to your point, that can drastically extend the time that it takes to investigate a case. And by the time you get to the end of the case, the criminal has already, they're already 10 steps ahead and you're just trying to keep up. So that's a big part of what we try to do is provide different tools, filtering options and features within our platform that really help you speed up and stay on top of it so that you can kind of cut them off rather than having to chase them down, for years and years and years. That's a great point there, Pablo. And so I'll jump over to kind of our dashboard and give you a bit of a walkthrough. I've got one kind of simplified case that I'll walk through, and then a few different aspects of the tool that I'll kind of touch on just to give folks an idea of the capabilities that are available to them. Keep in mind, this is a bit of a stripped down version of the tool for obvious reasons. We didn't want to kind of present too much sensitive material, so we've removed a number of things from the tool, but I'll try to touch on as much as I can throughout the workshop today. And so just to kind of give you an idea of what you're looking at here is on the left side are a few of the different blockchains we support. For today, we'll primarily focus on Bitcoin. I think Pablo mentioned, that's primarily it's still definitely the biggest cryptocurrency by market share. You can actually see here, Bitcoin still makes up about 41.4% of the cryptocurrency ecosystem, with Ethereum sitting at about 20%. So they're still very much, the dominant two kind of cryptocurrencies in the space. And like I said, we do support Bitcoin, Ethereum, along with all the ERC20 tokens. And then we actually have support for a number of other blockchains as well. On the left side here is some of the different aspects of the tool. So today we'll primarily focus on QLUE. I'll touch on BitRank a little bit as well. And then we also have our block explorer. So we kind of have a very similar version of the blockchain.com block explorer, but again, with that kind of additional level of data overlaid on top of it. And then an address watch feature that allows for ongoing monitoring of different addresses. And again, since the blockchain doesn't forget, you can always add an address in there that you might not have up-to-date data on, but we'll let you know as soon as we're able to kind of gather some further intel on that. And then on the bottom here, we just have a number of different help tools for our customers to explore. For today, I'll start out with a kind of an interesting one. Typically, when you're doing an investigation, a good place to start is obviously with an address. If you're a law enforcement agent, and you come across an address on a crime scene, or maybe somebody's mobile phone, or you've seen a scam happening online, and you've been able to kind of collect a Bitcoin address. That's typically a good place to start. You can also start with the transaction hash. But what we found is,
sorry to interrupt you. So the investigator or the compliance officer will somehow reach to that line of numbers and letters you just showed us, and that's what they first need to in order to start.
Essentially, yes. That's your best bet, is starting from an address or a transaction. And you can find that information through a number of different ways. Obviously doing an on-the-ground investigation of a crime scene. A lot of times when a scam or fraud case happens online, you'll be able to kind of uncover either a QR code or an address that's kind of been left behind in those types of cases.
That's the first thing then they should be looking for.
Yes, I would say so. Yes. The other way to go about it, though, is we've actually have our block explorer here, and as you can see, we have a number of different filtering options here. And we actually designed this for law enforcement because they came to us for a few investigations and said, hey guys, we don't have an address and we don't have a transaction, but we do have some other data that we want to start with and work kind of backwards. And what they had was they had a certain dollar value. So, a victim had come to them and say, hey, somebody stole 122 Bitcoin from me. So they have the exact transaction volume of that was stolen. And they might have the time of day or the day of week that it happened. And so just with those two data points, oftentimes you can kind of work backwards to get the address or transaction that you're looking for. And so a case that I always like to demonstrate is actually, I'm not too sure if you guys are familiar with it, but in the US a few months ago, there was a large ransomware case with the Colonial Pipeline. The Colonial Pipeline is for anyone who doesn't know, is a very large part of the US infrastructure. It's it was quite a devastating ransomware attack. Actually, it's stopped gas flowing to a lot of different states in the United States. And it was all because of essentially a ransomware attack where they demanded that they pay a ransom, X amount of Bitcoin, in order to gain control back of their pipeline. And so at the time, from internally with our organization, we don't know anyone at the Colonial Pipeline. They weren't a customer of ours at the time. And so we didn't have any direct access to retrieve the addresses that they were paying these ransom payments to. But similar to the law enforcement agents that we developed these tools for, we knew the time of day and the transaction value. So with those two data points, I can actually filter through the entire Bitcoin blockchain here. I can filter by time between, I know this transaction happened on May 8th, I believe it was, 2021. So let me just change that. There we go. May 2021, May 8th, and we'll go 12 a.m. And then May 8th, 2021, let's say 11:57. So we're essentially, we've narrowed down the time frame that we're looking at to just May 8th. So the 24-hour period of May 8th.
You could even narrow it to a 10-minute block. The precise block that you want to scan.
Exactly. Yep. And so I don't know specifically what, like, the exact minute that the transaction transpired, but I know that it happened sometime on May 8th. The other data point that I have was that I also know it was right around 75 Bitcoin that was sent in the ransomware payment. So I can actually input 75 and 75.1. So that's a fairly small range that I'm looking between. And so once I click apply here, it's essentially going to search through the entire blockchain and try to find transactions that fit the criteria that I just input. So any transaction between 75 and 75.1 that happened on May 8th. And so let's just click apply, see what happens. It's going to scan the blockchain, and now it's identified there's 2 blocks on May 8th that include a transaction with that specific output value. So if we just go to this first one here, again, it's going to list out all the transactions in this block, and we can sift through these and try to find the one we're looking for. Or again, we can just input through these filtering options the 75 Bitcoin that we're looking for. Select apply. And now, in a matter of seconds, we've had 2 transactions that fit our exact criteria that happened on May 8th. So, at the beginning, we had an entire blockchain with hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of transactions. Here a minute later, we're looking at 2 transactions, and I can actually look even deeper, clicking these little arrows here, and you can actually see it once I hover over this little tag. It belongs to the DarkSide ransomware group, which was the group that actually attacked the Colonial pipeline. So I've gone from not knowing the address that was involved. All I had was the date and time and the volume of the transaction. And here I've been able to kind of collect the addresses that were involved in that transaction. So now I can go grab those addresses and begin my investigation.
The entire blockchain.
Exactly.
Millions and millions and billions of transactions to the precise 2 you're looking for. That's incredible.
Exactly. And now I can go, I have an address here that was an input into the transaction, and I have multiple outputs that were involved in the transaction. So now I have 3 addresses that I can then go input into QLUE, which is my investigative tool, and I can start to map out the different transactions, start to identify other addresses that were involved, and really start to kind of paint a clear picture. So I just wanted to identify that, because if you don't necessarily have an address or a transaction that you're working with, obviously that's the ideal way to start an investigation. But if you don't necessarily have that, there are other ways to kind of identify that, this being one of them. And so from there, that's essentially when we would then go into our investigation. So I've actually got an address here that I've copied, and I've got a bit of a backstory on the case that we'll look into today. So once you're able to identify that address or transaction, I just simply put it in the top search bar here, select enter. And this first step here, what our system will do is essentially provide you with as much information on this address as we have. A lot of this is very similar to what a public block explorer will show you. So the total balance that's currently sitting in the address, total number of transactions, our BitRank score. This is actually something proprietary to our system. So we actually provide a score for every single address on the blockchain. And that scoring system goes from 0 to 100. And it's meant to act, somewhat along the lines of a credit score, a traditional credit score, where it would indicate a risk for a certain address. So if you see, any number closer to,
maybe you have a financial institution and someone says, I sold these bitcoins of mine, and they give you an address, and they can fairly easily and quickly verify what is the risk they have of taking that transaction as, as a good one, and providing the means of exchange from crypto to fiat. To put an example.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what it's used for. In the case that somebody does go out, very recently we had the Poly network hack. If anyone was following along with that, where a lot of Ethereum was hacked, or a lot of different tokens, but essentially a large chunk of Ethereum. And so in that case, if the person who made that hack decided to go try to deposit that in an exchange to try to cash out and realize those gains, that exchange would have a tool like ours in place, where they scan that incoming transaction, and they would be able to identify, whoa, we might not want to deal with this person. Their address is coming in and indicating that there's very high risk associated with it. Before we proceed with, allowing them to cash out through our organization, we're going to do a little bit more due diligence into that. And then that's when they would be able to identify, whether or not it was involved in a hack or not.
That's amazing, because BitRank will raise a flag if the case merits it, and they will be able to quickly say, oh, let's take a deeper look into this. Let's see where this comes from, and fewer transactions backwards, they will be able to see where the money comes from.
Exactly, and it's all just a matter of timing, right? Like as you're growing as a crypto exchange, it's, and you go from 10 customers to 100 to 1,000 to 10,000. It's nearly impossible to, investigate each one of those individual transactions in a manual way. So that's where BitRank comes in through the API. Is you literally can just set it up, forget about it, and our system will send you alerts anytime something of that might need a little bit of a second set of eyes on. We'll send you an alert and let you know, hey, this one has a red flag attached. You might want to do a little bit more due diligence. And those red flags can all be set up by the customer. So it's very specific to each organization. And yeah, it saves them a ton of time, and they really only have to focus on the ones that are high risk, and the rest of the transactions flow through as normal. Yeah,
it's a huge solution.
Absolutely. And so this kind of first stage is, let's say this was a high risk address. This is essentially the first stage they would come to kind of look into it and see all the relevant information relating to this address. Total received transactions, total sent transactions. So right away we can identify there's only been 3 total transactions with this address, so it's not very active. But there's about 14.5 Bitcoin, so no small volume that's moved through it, and there's since been 0 Bitcoin left behind. And we can actually see when it was first seen and last seen on the blockchain. So it was created on January 7th, 2021. And it stopped transacting in January 7th, 2021. So this address has only been alive for about a 24-hour period.
We could say that they quickly passed through that address, to use it as maybe as a funnel, and
Potentially. This case is a little bit different, and I'll provide some context once we jump into the graph. But yeah, those are the types of conclusions that you can start to draw from when you're looking into these information. And even further to that, down on the bottom here, we actually have each individual transaction. So, if an address has 3 transactions, 100, 1,000, we'll have all of those listed for you down here on the bottom. You can again expand them, see all the inputs, the outputs, the risk scores for each individual address, and the total values that are getting moved around. So it gives you full insight into each of these transactions. And any entities that would be involved, we would have identified here in the flags. And any risk that is involved, we would again have identified there on the flags. So you can have kind of full insight just by breaking out those transactions there. And then from there, to get a bit of a better picture, we actually have our graphing engine, or the main focus of QLUE. So it's just plotting out a few initial hops for me here. And so I know for most people, they probably haven't seen something like this, so it's a little bit new. So I'll kind of try to explain some of the different things you're looking at. Let me just I'll change the layout so that it kind of goes from left to right as if we're reading a book. And so what I did there was this address circled in blue was the address we were looking at on the previous page. So it has a total of 3 transactions. There's no balance in it yet. 14.5 Bitcoin have moved through it. That's all the information we were able to gather from the initial page. And now you can start to see where that volume came from and where it's going. So that 14.5 Bitcoin that moved through it came, actually most of it came from this transaction here, and actually came from this address here. So if you're curious, where the source of funds might have been, you can actually start expanding this address backwards, and it will start to show you further and further back where that money originated from. So very interesting in that way, as well as forward. So you can start to follow the money forward this way, and again, expand this address and see all the transactions moving forward. Before I do so, I'll provide a bit of context on this case. We removed some information just because it was a case that we worked previously. So we didn't want to put any sensitive information out there. But essentially what happened was there was if anyone's familiar with paper wallets, essentially it's a cold storage way of storing your Bitcoin. And there's websites out there that help you generate a private key for your paper wallet. And so one of these websites was actually sold. It was previously a very trusted website. Lots of people used it to generate their private keys for their paper wallets. Everything was good. But the original website owner actually ended up selling it to a third party. And that third party ended up essentially inputting a backdoor in the website so that when the website was generating the private key for the customer, it was also sending the private key to the person that owned the website. So not only were you getting your private key for your paper wallet, you were also giving it away to the person that was running the website. And it took...
The password to your bank account was being handled to the...
Exactly. Right as you're essentially, you know, if anyone does online banking, it would be the same as you're creating your password for your online banking, the bank on the other side has full transparency into what you're typing in the password box. So very intrusive, obviously not ideal for the people that are, you know, setting up their paper wallets that way. And unfortunately, that's what happened here. Was the person that actually owned this address was the victim in this case. And they actually came to us, and you can see the January 7th transactions here were the transactions where she was purchasing Bitcoin, moving it into her wallet. And on the same day, January 7th, when she moved it into this wallet, you know, these transactions were made at 5:13 a.m. and 5:33 a.m. Less than 20 minutes later at 5:43 a.m., the person that received her private wallet through that website actually moved her entire balance, which at the time was about $545,000. So again, no small amount of money. They actually ended up moving that into a wallet that they controlled over here. So she came to us, you know, obviously quite distressed, saying, hey, I had no idea what happened, but my entire Bitcoin wallet was just drained of all of its money. So obviously, you know, from our perspective, we got on the phone with her, collected as much information as we could, realized that she had used this paper wallet website. We did a bit of due diligence with one of our partners to figure out that there was actually a backdoor, and that was kind of how we were able to conclude that the private key was given away that way. And then we got to work on the blockchain investigation here, following the money forward. So now we know this was the victim. So I'll change the color to black here just to make it easy to identify. And now we know this is the person that was able to gain access to her private key. So this is, you know, potentially one of the culprits in this case. So I'll identify that one as a red address. And a few things just before I do trace it forward is these circles here are essentially individual Bitcoin addresses. The squares are transactions, just indicating which direction the funds are flowing. So you can see the red arrows, the funds are moving in, and then the green arrows are the funds move to the next address. And it gives you the total volume of funds that are moving as well. And then these the numbers in the top right here, that's letting us know that this address has a total of 2 transactions. And currently there's one that's showing on the graph. So this transaction's showing, but there's one other transaction that we're not yet looking at. So if I wanted to expand that and see that next transaction and essentially follow the money forward, I can just simply double click and it's going to trace that next transaction forward for me. So from that initial victim wallet, we now have $545,000 moving over to this address. And then they also move, let's go off the Bitcoin number. So 14.5 Bitcoin moves to this address. And again, they move that entire balance. So 14.5 Bitcoin. And this time they actually split it into 2 separate addresses. So there's 5.7 Bitcoin going down here and 8.7 Bitcoin going up here. And let's mark those as red as well, just because they're likely belonging to the same party. And from here, I'll follow typically in an investigation, I'll follow the largest volume first and see where that one ends up. So this 8.7 Bitcoin, again, I'll double click to expand that next transaction. And they actually end up splitting it once again. So that 8.7 Bitcoin now turns into 2.1 Bitcoin going up here and 6.5 Bitcoin going down below. And let's just keep following it along. Oh, and this time they don't actually split it. They leave that 6.5 Bitcoin and they actually just move it to this one address over here. And if we continue down that path, they end up splitting it again. And what you'll notice is a good portion of it, so about 6.5 Bitcoin, they send about half a Bitcoin down here to this address, but they actually send 6 Bitcoin, which at the time of the transaction was about 225,000 US dollars. They send it directly to Binance. And so this was an address that we were able to collect information on. We identified it as belonging to Binance. It was one of their deposit addresses. So now if you're an investigator working this case, you now have a hot lead to go identify who this person was. If you're a law enforcement agent, you can subpoena Binance, collect the KYC information on who controls the address that was depositing this information. And from there, you now have a suspect and you can kind of further that next stage of your investigation. And the interesting thing about this case was, so that was just one of the pathways that we followed, which ended up at Binance. And we ended up at Binance in about, from the original victim over here in black, about 1, 2, 3, 4, in a matter of about 5 transactions. They moved from the victim's address all the way into Binance to try to cash out their proceeds. So in the grand scheme of things,
Binance, then they will know who they probably already have performed a traditional KYC on the owner of the wallet, and then there you have the criminal.
Exactly. So yeah, if Binance has the proper processes in place, they would be able to identify this ahead of time and be able to stop that transaction. If they weren't, ideally a law enforcement investigator or somebody similar would be able to identify this after the fact and then go to Binance to be able to collect the personal information on the person that was involved in that transaction. So either way, it's a way to kind of weed out that bad actor. And just going back, so that was just following one of the trails, the larger volume here, when they did the original kind of split. And so the interesting thing about this case is if we actually follow this other balance, 5.7 Bitcoin, still quite a large volume of money. We can start to expand these transactions and move our way forward. And if you see here, they split it up into 2 transactions. And very quickly, right after this first transaction, they send money over to this, which is actually 2 private addresses. And then they send 5.1 Bitcoin through this address over here. So we can continue down that path. And so this address that we just expanded, coming from that second split, actually ends up at the exact same Binance address. So what we can kind of conclude from there was, the person that originally was able to, take the funds out of the victim's address very, very likely controls all of the addresses in between. And by being able to go to Binance and identify who actually sent these deposits in, you would essentially be able to identify who the person was that was involved in this entire case. So, very quickly, and what have we've been doing this for about eight or 9 minutes. We've gone from a victim's address who lost, $500,000. We've traced it forward about 5 or 6 hops, and as long as Binance is willing to work with us, we'll now be able to identify who the culprit was in this investigation and proceed to, hopefully try to get the funds back for that victim.
It's closed.
Case closed, exactly.
Oh.
So yeah,
So
I wanted to keep it.
Hard.
Exactly. It can be difficult. I know there's a lot of underlying technology to blockchain and cryptocurrency. But like myself, I'm a very visual learner. I like to see things visually. So when you start to display things in a graph-like visual way, like we're looking at here, it starts to make a lot of sense, and you can start to follow dollar values from address to address, and really again, provide quite a clear picture. And then with that data overlay, where we're able to identify the different entities and organizations operating in the space, again, very similar to this this transaction here, it's rather than looking at just kind of anonymous strings of numbers and letters, you're able to identify the actual parties or organizations that are involved in those transactions. And, from a regulatory perspective or from a law enforcement perspective, that's the type of information that they need to utilize in order to, kind of weed out the bad actors and allow this industry to flourish and really take advantage of the opportunities.
Amazing demonstration, Colin. I found myself in the past facing, some criminal cases, and being able only to use open source forensic tools like Blockchair, blockchain.com, Etherscan, and well, Ethereum is another matter, because you have the internal and the external communication, and the communication between dApps, DAP,
Yep.
PS, and but once you put it this way and you start to recognize the patterns, basically you have the biggest problems that regulatory bodies and criminal bodies and financial institutions are facing, because they can now not only identify and verify the identity, which is what FATF rules demands them, but they can also evaluate risk, because one of the main dysfunctions of the regulations that everybody's trying to put in place now is that perhaps it's not always necessary to reveal all the information, only when you perhaps got a red flag from BitRank verified and you say, whoa, what's happening here? And you can link that maybe to a suspicious operation report you need to file before the central bank, and or simply assert the risk level, the risk appetite level that is desirable for your institution, and you define if you are willing to receive a transaction from a VSAP or not, perhaps not. And so this is an amazing tool, because putting it in a graphical manner is the way for everybody to understand it. You don't need to face from the blockchain expressed in, I don't know, in transaction hash code. You can just look at it. So it's an amazing tool.
Exactly. Yeah, I kind of found, when I was first started getting into the industry, I was trying to collect as much information as possible as well. And I was, utilizing blockchain.com, Etherscan, all these public block explorers. And it's when it's very disjointed and you have to, move from page to page, and you're only getting, one transaction on one page, and then you got to go to the next page to see who's involved in the next one. It's very disjointed and tough to follow. But when you lay out an investigation like this, and you can kind of see the whole picture right on one screen and really see all the different connections and everything, it really becomes quite clear and easy to work out of. So yeah, I think as we move further into this space, more and more people get involved. The cryptocurrency, one thing crypto is really good for is collaboration. Lots of different parties are working together to collect this information, make it easier for financial institutions to get involved, and hopefully move the industry forward, in a safe way, so that everyone can kind of take advantage of it.
That's amazing, Colin. Thank you very much for this demonstration. The tool really is something to behold, because you can depart just from a time period and a value amount, and that will make it. So you can narrow it down to a block, and even if you need to scan directly an entire block, it's doable. It is doable. Although it's not the best, but you can even narrow out. You can narrow it down even further, and you started from a date and a value, and you ended up with 2 transactions. It's within a sea of transactions, and after that you were able to trace the funds until the exit that was in Binance, which is a regulated BASP, which needs to have in place proper KYC procedures, and there you have your guy or your girl.
Exactly. And as we move forward and continue to implement more regulation, things like the travel rule, now that one exchange has been able to identify that bad actor, all the exchanges will be able to identify that same address through, collaboration like travel rule, sharing different information, and really kind of, being open to that.
Absolutely, and share it to the appropriate people, to the, let's say they get subpoenaed by a prosecutor or a central bank, then they can respond to the appropriate authorities, and personally identifiable that data is not just floating around in the internet in the open for everyone to take advantage of it. So, I wanted to demystify the fact that many people understand the work you do as sort of an aggression to anonymity. That's just myth. These kind of tools also, in fact, help the development of the ecosystem. They don't harm it in any way.
100%. And yeah, that's kind of the big misconception we hear all the time is, Bitcoin's anonymous, cryptocurrency is anonymous. You'll never be able to trace these people down. But in fact, it's almost the exact opposite. It's, it's all out there, publicly available. All you have to do is start to do a little bit digging, start tagging, and verifying different points, collecting it all, kind of displaying it in a way that makes sense. And from there, you have a very clear picture of what's going on. And yeah, to your point, that's a big part of it, as well as SAR reports, STR reports. We hear from law enforcement all the time that those reports are often providing the pieces of information that help them further their cases. So from a VASP perspective, if you're able to collect this information very easily, submit those reports, very quickly, that provides the information law enforcement needs to then go do their investigation, do their work, weed out the bad actors. And it's a bit of a cycle, because once you're getting the bad actors out, it's beneficial for the VASPs. So the VASPs continue to do their STR, the law enforcement can continue to do their work, and it's a nice cycle where everybody's working together to make it a safe environment to work in.
That's amazing, because that's what the blockchain is about. It's about transparency. It's the other way around. It's not about bad actors. But sadly, those who are in the search for any new opportunity to misbehave usually get there first. It's like a constant. You're always chasing them from behind. But regarding blockchain, I don't think they have too much maneuver, range anymore, because that's once we understand how the things are registered in the blockchain, as you said at the beginning, the blockchain never lies and the blockchain doesn't forget. So all data is there. Well, I would really like to thank you very much for this amazing presentation, and I would encourage very much every one of the attendees to get in touch with Colin, to get in touch with Blockchain Intelligence Group to further develop, your skills and also have a proper education regarding how this mandatory, requirement will apply or shall apply or can be applied to any of the incumbent business, public or private, institutional, so to say, everyone, regardless of your model of how you interact with cryptocurrencies, this is an essential part of it.
Absolutely.
So I think I have some questions from the audience. Colin, if you have a couple of more minutes. David Saavedra says, I would like to know if the process became hardest of the transactions are through Lightning Network. That's a yes.
Yeah, great question. Yeah, the Lightning Network does provide quite a bit of complexity to the investigations. It's still fairly early days, I would say, for Lightning Network and Liquid. A lot of the different kind of like second layer applications providing for quicker transactions. But it's still essentially at some point does come back on chain to where essentially you can continue to transact with it. We haven't implemented anything yet in our tool to trace Lightning Network transactions, so it's still very much a development on our side. but it does add quite a bit of complexity. So yeah, great question.
No doubt, but let's say you run a light network node. Okay, so you got a bunch of transactions inside the node, but as you said, at one point that needs to come back to the blockchain.
Yep, exactly.
Although I understand the question that it presents quite a challenge because, well, as we said, they are always looking for innovative ways to hide their paths, but luckily we have the blockchain in place now.
Exactly. The bad guys will always try to get a step ahead, but we're always right on their tail. So we're doing what we can to stay up to speed.
Okay, amazing. Well, in the name of everyone here at Blockchain Summit Global and the attendees, and this very high quality webinar you provided, I would like to thank you very much for your participation, Colin. And as we said earlier, I encourage very much everyone to get in touch with you to further, understand and continue evolving in this space that is moving so fast.
Absolutely, yeah. Really appreciate you having me, B. Pablo. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for jumping on with me. And yeah, for everyone attending, really appreciate you jumping on. I did throw my LinkedIn and my email in the chat there. So if anyone wants to connect with me on LinkedIn, feel free to do so. If you have any questions or anything that we didn't answer today, feel free to shoot me an email and I can get back to you. But yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thanks a lot for having us, and I'll look forward to future webinars.
Thanks to you, Colin.
All right, have a good one.
Thanks a lot.
Have a good one. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.